In the 1970s, decades before increased airport security, an armed stranger hijacks a 727, holding the passengers and crew for ransom. To catch the Skyjacker, the FBI embarks on a cross-country manhunt. The dangerous chase continues as agents struggle to end his flight from justice and capture one of the United States' most notorious hijackers. In this program, some of the names of the participants have been changed to protect their identities. On April 7th, 1972, an armed man forced a passenger jet to make an unscheduled landing in San Francisco. He was holding the passengers and crew hostage in exchange for $500,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and 6 hours of jet fuel. The FBI was forced to watch and wait while the hijacker remained in complete control of the situation. After his demands were met, he released the hostages but kept the crew on board. This hijacking was remarkably similar to an event that occurred 4 months earlier when a man named D.B. Cooper jumped from a jetliner with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and vanished. The FBI wanted to ensure this hijacker didn't get away. As darkness fell, he ordered the plane to take off. Suspecting the hijacker would use the parachute to jump from the plane, the FBI followed in close pursuit. Somewhere over Utah, the pilot felt a strange bump. The hijacker must have parachuted out, but he needed visual confirmation. Flight attendant Diane Surdam walked to the back of the plane to determine whether he was still on board. The hijacker was gone. He had jumped somewhere between Provo and a small town called Springville, Utah. Law enforcement agents converged on Provo, setting up roadblocks all over the area. They believe the hijacker landed somewhere on the sprawling prairie and mud flats covering some 35 miles around Utah Lake. The search continued all night, but they found no trace of him. The next morning, law enforcement officials in Utah continued the search. Daring hijacking in U.S. history landed upon them, literally from out of the blue. It had been nearly 10 hours since the hijacker jumped, and police continued to canvass the area. The search area stretched nearly 40 square miles along the rural, rambling hillsides of Provo, Utah, and around the mudflats near Utah Lake. Investigators suspected they were searching for the infamous D.B. Cooper. 4 months earlier, he hijacked a plane over Washington State, demanding $200,000. Like this most recent hijacking, he also parachuted from the plane. No sign of D.B. Cooper or his money was ever found. If D.B. Cooper had struck again, the investigators in Utah were determined not to let him slip through their fingers a second time. But the territory was wide, and after hours of searching, officials found nothing. No suspect, no parachute, no money. The case was becoming remarkably similar to D.B. Cooper, according to Agent Russell Callan.
The modus operandi generally did tie pretty well together in my mind. There's detail after detail as far as the number of shoots, the procedures, where the fuel truck should go, where he sat in the seat.
As local police intensified their search, the FBI got a tip. A highway patrolman called the Utah FBI and told them he had a friend named Richard McCoy who he thought might be involved.
He also worked as a dispatcher for the Utah Highway Patrol. He happened to be on duty that Friday night of the jump, so he's hearing broadcasts. He's hearing all the talk and discussion. So he has a few seconds apparently, and he calls for Richard. Richard's not home.
The patrolman told the investigators Richard McCoy talked with him about hijacking a plane and parachuting out the back. The FBI was getting hundreds of false leads, but because of the source of this one, they decided to check it out. McCoy lived nearby, so 2 agents were sent to his home. He lived in a very modest house in a suburb of Provo. When they asked whether they could talk with Richard McCoy, his sister-in-law, who lived with the family, said he was at National Guard duty. The agents inquired if they could speak to McCoy's wife. They were told she could not come to the door.
Well, that made me realize, you know, there could be really something to this.
Agents looked into McCoy's background. They obtained a copy of his Army service records. His past military service was impressive. He had done 2 tours in Vietnam, first as a demolition expert in Green Beret. Later, he re-enlisted, training as a helicopter pilot. He'd received several medals, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Purple Heart. The agents learned he was currently piloting a helicopter in the search for the hijacker. The military file contained samples of his fingerprints and handwriting, which they sent to the crime lab. Richard McCoy was pulled out of National Guard duty and questioned by the FBI. He was very cooperative with the agents.
To do something for me.
He agreed to provide a handwriting sample.
And card, I'd like you to write something for me.
They asked him to write down the words found on the note Diane Surdam hid in her purse.
Everybody off now except stewardesses. Get off the ground.
He told the agents he had been out to dinner with his wife on the night of the hijacking. The agents took his photo, but they didn't have enough to make an arrest. McCoy was free to go. McCoy did not seem to be the kind of criminal they were looking for. He was a Mormon, a father of 2, studying law enforcement at Brigham Young University. Agents learned McCoy practiced jumping with a local skydiving school. An instructor at the school told agents McCoy was at best an average parachutist. He had never known him to dive at night. When asked if he'd ever heard McCoy talk about hijacking a plane, the instructor said since the D.B. Cooper case, most of the skydivers talked about it. Investigators took McCoy's photo to San Quentin. They showed it to the convict, and he picked Richard Floyd McCoy out of a photo lineup without hesitation.
That's the guy. Number 6.
Then the FBI got a break.
Things start falling in line when the document section of the FBI calls him and says that's his writing, that Skyjack note. And then the ident division calls and says, and we've identified 2 latent fingerprints on the mainliner magazine that was taken from that seat. Everything started falling in place.
Investigators now had enough for a search warrant and an arrest warrant. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. may have known how to escape in midair, but now on the ground, he was cornered. At dawn on April 9th, 1972, Utah FBI agents gathered outside the home of Richard Floyd McCoy. He was the only suspect in a daring hijacking of a United Airlines 727. McCoy had been up early that morning. He was to report for National Guard duty. Federal law enforcement, however, had other plans.
Freeze, FBI, you're under arrest! Get out, get out, get out of there!
After matching his fingerprints and handwriting to items found on the hijacked plane, Richard McCoy was arrested in his home. Lead agent Russell Callum felt McCoy's motivation was obvious.
You understand? Anything you say can and will be
Money, I know,
used
was
in the
tight.
court of law.
He had the capability, the expertise. I think he got obsessed with the idea. And I say that based on some of the people that knew him socially, what they said, what they heard him say. His back was kind of up against the wall.
Everybody back.
The media, who had been following the search, got word of the arrest and was on hand as McCoy was taken away. Friends and neighbors in the quiet town of Provo were stunned by the news.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
Armed with a warrant, FBI agents searched the house. In a closet, they recovered a bag with a helmet, military flight suit, and skydiving equipment. They also found a file of newspaper clippings on the infamous D.B. Cooper hijacking case. The evidence was piling up. A .45 caliber pistol was found sitting alongside a hand grenade. The grenade, they discovered, was a dud. Then, for investigators, came the most stunning sight of all. $499,970. A mere $30 shy of the whole $500,000. Not surprisingly, the serial numbers on the bills matched those paid by United Airlines as ransom. Richard Floyd McCoy was charged with air piracy and held without bond in the Salt Lake County Jail. The FBI's case seemed airtight. They were interested in trying to prove the connection between McCoy and Cooper. The FBI began to dig deep into the D.B. Cooper case. They found striking similarities. Both Cooper and McCoy used false names and disguises. They both gave instructions to the pilot on FAA forms. The way the passengers were moved to the front of the plane and finally released were identical in both cases. As was, of course, their unusual means of escape. Investigators surmised on the night of the jump, McCoy secured the money to his jumpsuit and leapt out of the plane. The sport chute to steer himself away from the searchers. He must have landed in a field outside the FBI search perimeter. The chute he jumped with, he had brought with him, and it did not have a homing device. But the most intriguing evidence linking McCoy with Cooper was something Cooper left on the plane. A clip-on tie and tie clasp, both of which were identified by relatives as belonging to Richard McCoy. The evidence, however, was purely circumstantial. There were no fingerprints that placed McCoy on the scene of the first hijacking. No proof of his whereabouts on the day of the crime. And no sign of the money. On June 26, 1972, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. went on trial for only one count of air piracy. The state presented its handwriting and fingerprint evidence, the eyewitness who identified the suspect in a lineup, and the weapons and ransom money found in the defendant's home. The jury reached a verdict in 90 minutes. Guilty. Before he was sentenced, however, the defendant had to meet with federal probation officer Bernie Rhodes. Rhodes was to give the judge a sentencing recommendation, but he had an ulterior motive.
The questions we were interested in were not only what Richard McCoy had done today, but what he had done 5 months earlier when D.B. Cooper, a man matching his description, using the name Dan Cooper, purchased a one-way ticket from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. We believe that Richard McCoy was the individual that did that.
A couple months before.
It was the last chance anyone from Utah law enforcement would have to question the defendant about D.B. Cooper.
And I was he gets hurt.
But McCoy stood firm.
Damage to any property.
He told Rhodes he was home with his wife the night D.B. Cooper jumped out of a plane over Washington State.
And I had
when questioned further as to whether he was Cooper, McCoy said nothing. Richard McCoy received 45 years to be served in a federal penitentiary. The hijacker was sent to the maximum security facility in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Behind the barbed wire fences, investigators were convinced they had heard the last of Richard McCoy and D.B. Cooper. FBI agent Russell Callum remembers Richard McCoy didn't share their sentiments.
And I remember very well, he said, "I'll tell you right now, I'll escape." Told me to my face, "I'll escape." He says, "You guys aren't gonna hold me." You're not going to hold me.
Agent Callum had heard it all before. McCoy was a former Green Beret, and he had jumped out the back of a jetliner. Richard Floyd McCoy was not a man to make idle threats. In 1972, Richard McCoy was sent to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, a maximum security facility in Pennsylvania. He was sentenced to serve 45 years for air piracy after he hijacked a plane over Colorado and demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped from the plane at an altitude of 14,000 feet with the money strapped to his chest. He was captured 2 days later by the FBI at his home outside Provo, Utah. At Lewisburg, McCoy was considered an escape risk. When he was sentenced, McCoy told reporters he would rather go before a firing squad or to the gas chamber than spend the rest of his life behind bars. But Richard McCoy had no choice. When he arrived, the guards were told to keep a close watch on him, according to retired prison guard Randy Noon.
McCoy was on the hot list because he was doing 45 years for air piracy, and he had made comments that he could never do 45 years, and his first opportunity he was going to leave the scene.
Having completed more years of higher education than the typical inmate, McCoy was assigned a job in the prison dental lab. Although the guards monitored him closely, it was not close enough. McCoy wasted no time formulating a plan to make his escape. He started making a gun out of dental plaster. To help him escape, McCoy struck up a friendship with Marvin Wells, a career criminal serving 55 years for a series of bank robberies and a prison break. The two made for an unlikely pair, a Mormon who'd studied law enforcement, and a stick-up man. As far as the guards knew, Richard McCoy was a model prisoner.
McCoy, he was a good inmate. He was a Mormon. He was a Sunday school teacher. McCoy was sort of easygoing, but calculated.
In 1973, after 10 months behind bars, the appellate court upheld his conviction, and the Supreme Court denied a motion to hear the case. McCoy thought the appeals might be his ticket to freedom. Now, he wasn't going anywhere. He'd even been excommunicated from the Mormon Church. It was time to make his break. After years of watching, McCoy noticed every Saturday a garbage truck left the prison at the same time. It took the inside Sallyport gate exactly 16 seconds to close after the truck entered. Armed with their finished .45 caliber pistol made of plaster, the two men waited for the right moment. McCoy and Wells needed help, and so they were joined by two other convicted robbers. August 10th, 1974, right on schedule, the truck entered the Sally Port. Everything was going according to plan. Using gloves they had stolen from work detail, the men vaulted the fence. As McCoy anticipated, there was only one guard by the truck. He was unarmed. The men revved up the truck and crashed through the outside gate of the cell. The officer in the tower fired at the truck, but the bullets bounced off the heavy steel.
Now, in any escape, you've got to have a good plan, but you've got to have a lot of luck. And these guys had a lot of luck. When they ran through the rear gate, the gate flipped up and landed on top of the garbage truck.
Luck held when the gate slid off the truck and wedged into the exit of the prison. When the officers arrived, they found the road blocked. Go out the other exit, buying the convicts precious time. Police were dispatched from all over the state. Because the gate blocked the exit, the convicts had a small head start on their pursuers. Outside the prison, the fugitives pulled off when they saw a couple getting out of their car. While McCoy and his men went to talk with the couple, one of the convicts pulled the truck to the back of the house. Inside, the men told the couple they only needed some civilian clothes and a less noticeable getaway car. They took the clothes and their car keys and left the couple tied up in their kitchen. As they jumped in the car, the police were already scrambling to pick up their trail. The FBI was immediately notified. Agent Delmar Mayfield joined the search.
This was the first escape from inside since 1953. And anytime somebody's desperate enough to break out of an institution like they did, then they're desperate enough to be very dangerous.
Richard McCoy made good on his promise. He was on the run once again. As night fell, it appeared law enforcement had lost track of McCoy and the convicts. The fugitives had been on the run for several hours and had tied up and stolen the car of a married couple. By the time the couple freed themselves and called police, the convicts were long gone. Police widened their search perimeter around the prison. Investigators believe the men were armed and dangerous. They found no clues to the direction in which they were traveling. By the next morning, state police, sheriff's deputies, and FBI agents, aided by search dogs and helicopters, combed the wooded mountains in a 20-mile radius around the prison.
We found out what direction they were headed in, which was west, when he assumed they were heading to the mountains. We knew the area pretty well. And there was a lot of cabins in that area. People were spending the weekend up there. My partner and I decided we would take that route and go up there and start knocking on doors and warning the people that was in the area that there was an escape from the institution.
While investigators searched west, the convicts moved south. The gang needed cash to stay on the lam. So the escaped convicts decided to do what they knew best. Armed robbery.
Everybody down!
3 days after the jailbreak in Pollocksville, North Carolina, a small town near where Richard McCoy had grown up, 3 masked gunmen entered a bank, tied up the staff, and ran away with over $16,000. The 4th man was seen driving the getaway car. Special Agent Bob Fanning and other members of the FBI were called in to work the case. They were aware of the jailbreak in Pennsylvania.
We knew that McCoy had a number of relatives living in and around Cove City. Logical assumption would be that they're going in that direction and would possibly be in contact with some of his relatives down there.
Almost immediately, they suspected Richard McCoy and his gang.
They may have been the ones involved in this because of the fact that McCoy and the 3 guys that he had escaped with were all convicted bank robbers.
Just come over here, I'll talk to you now, okay?
The agents could not confirm their suspicions. None of the tellers saw the robbers clearly enough to make an identification. A massive manhunt was organized. But the terrain, a rural, swampy area, made for slow going.
A couple of other agents spent several hours driving around the back roads in that area looking to see if we would spot anything unusual. We were basically just kind of scouting the area and looking for this car that had been stolen up in Pennsylvania.
The men made their way to a deserted logging road and began trying to hide their car. Then they heard the helicopter. The pilot spotted 4 men near the Great Dover Swamp. The men scattered in all directions into the surrounding brush. The pilot called for backup. Law enforcement officers arrived on the scene. The agents knew the fugitives were armed and would not hesitate to use their weapons. The helicopter followed 2 of the men and led police to them. 2 of the robbers were captured, and $5,000 from the bank were recovered. Agents confirmed the men were the convicts they'd been searching for since they broke out of prison in Pennsylvania. But the ringleaders, Richard McCoy and Marvin Wells, had vanished. It appeared as if they were swallowed up by the thick, dank foliage of the North Carolina swamps. The FBI and local law enforcement concentrated their manhunt in the area, but again, they lost Marvin Wells and Richard McCoy. Four convicts used a garbage truck to break through a prison gate in rural Pennsylvania and escape from the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. The ringleader of the gang was hijacker Richard McCoy. While police were tracking the fugitives, they were busy robbing banks. In rural North Carolina, authorities caught up with them. 2 of the men were captured, but the ringleaders, Marvin Wells and Richard McCoy, still eluded. For Richard McCoy, these North Carolina woods were home. McCoy spent many hours of his youth in the snake-infested swamps of Craven County, exploring its labyrinth of hidden inlets and waterways. The FBI put their top investigators on the case, but it was hopeless. 1 month passed, then another. Officials finally had to admit McCoy and Wells had slipped away out of the region. They had, in fact, headed west. They needed money to stay on the run and resume doing what Wells and McCoy were best known for: taking other people's money. Months after their escape, 2 armed men matching McCoy and Wells' description walked into a bank in Maryville, Tennessee. In a matter of minutes, they had gotten away with more than $76,000. Not bad for a professional bank robber and a one-time Sunday school teacher. When the Tennessee FBI responded to the bank, they found no fingerprints. Because the robbers' faces were covered, no one could describe the men. According to an FBI report, one of the robbers was described as quiet, soft-spoken, and talked like he had some education. The FBI all over the Southeast was searching for the bank robbing pair. They kept running into the same dead ends. After the men robbed a bank, they seemed to vanish. In Virginia, the Norfolk office of the FBI got a break when they received an anonymous tip. McCoy and Wells were hiding out in a house nearby. Special Agent Nicholas O'Hara was assigned to the case.
My supervisor called me in the office because I had the McCoy case. He called me in the office and he said, I've got an address I want you to check out. There might be some relationship.
O'Hara coordinated the FBI search for the fugitives. They started by trying to determine if the tip was valid.
We started knocking on doors of neighbors, showed them pictures of these 2 guys, and they told us that there were 2 men, right age group, white males, and they were really good neighbors. We didn't have a positive identification as to if those people were the people we were looking for, but it was good enough for us.
The agents set up surveillance. They needed a positive ID. If this was their hideout, they were determined not to let the men slip away again.
So what we did, we went across the street and spent the entire night watching the house.
For 2 days, O'Hara and his men staked out the suspected McCoy Wells hideout. There was no sign of the men. They set up surveillance around the neighborhood. On November 8th, agents noticed for the second night in a row, the same light turned on in the house at the same time. They had seen no activity inside and assumed the light was on a timer. The men decided this was their chance to go in and search the hideout. They were prepared in case the fugitives were inside. But the house was empty.
We found fully loaded guns by every window, and there was a clipping that we found of a Maryville, Tennessee bank robbery where two masked individuals had robbed it of about $76,000. So we felt pretty comfortable that this was the right group.
The FBI made the decision to lay in wait. As they waited, one of the surveillance teams spotted Wells and McCoy. Wells was driving the car. He stopped about a block away from the house. It was a cold, dank Saturday night. Unbeknownst to Richard McCoy, a few blocks away, 3 FBI agents were waiting for him, poised with shotguns in their hands. Richard McCoy would shortly be in their sights. The agents across the street watched as McCoy fumbled for his keys. It had been 90 days since he broke out of Lewisburg Penitentiary. The FBI was less than 10 feet from their suspect. Richard McCoy transformed from a law-abiding family man into a ruthless criminal. He had hijacked a plane, robbed several banks, and escaped from a federal prison. By November 1974, it had been 3 months since he and Marvin Wells drove through the front gate of Lewisburg Penitentiary. The FBI was still hunting him. Agents waited as McCoy slid the key into the front door of his hideout. When McCoy heard the FBI, he reached for his gun and fired. Outside the house, Marvin Wells took off. Swift pursuit. Wells didn't get far. Agent Bill Rafferty pursued.
It was high speed until we got right abreast to him, and then I just put the car into him. My partner sitting next to me had a shotgun, and he put it on him, no doubt about it. And I pulled the car right against his door so he couldn't get out even if he wanted to. Because escape is always on these guys' minds, no matter what.
The agents put Wells in cuffs and escorted him back to the house. Marvin Wells and Richard McCoy had been stopped. Richard McCoy died instantly from a gunshot wound to the chest. It was 90 days since Richard McCoy and Marvin Wells broke out of the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. For McCoy, the 90th day of freedom was his last. The FBI caught their man, but with McCoy died perhaps the greatest chance of learning the truth about the infamous D.B. Cooper. The Cooper case remained open, but over the years grew cold. 6 years after McCoy's death in 1980, a young boy stumbled upon a fascinating discovery while camping with his family in Washington State near the Columbia River. Bank records confirmed that these were, in fact, fragments of $5,800 of the $200,000 ransom paid to Cooper. Geologists claimed the money had not been hidden, but landed and was buried there naturally over time. A surge of interest in the case brought investigators to the area, but new clues would never be found. The eruption of Mount St. Helens a few months later buried the entire area in a thick coating of ash. To some, this finding confirmed the belief that Cooper, whoever he was, died in the fall over Washington. But to others, the discovery of the money only helps to prove motive. If D.B. Cooper survived the fall but lost hold of the money in midair, he would have all the more reason to want to try the stunt again.
Dan Cooper and Richard McCoy are probably the same guy. The sketch of Dan Cooper, of D.B. Cooper, put alongside the picture of Richard McCoy is almost identical. Physically, age, height, weight, nearly identical. Both of them wore brown suits, dark tie, wigs, wraparound sunglasses, both hijacked 727s. Both of them hid in the back of the plane, pushed the passengers to the front. Both of them used flight schedules to write their notes on.
Richard McCoy and D.B. Cooper's legacy changed aircraft design. In response to the hijackings, engineers redesigned the rear exit stairs in Boeing 727s to prevent them being opened in midair. The device they created was called the Cooper Vane. The legend of D.B. Cooper and the mystery of Richard McCoy will likely live on for decades to come.